condition has been for quite some time when you take a defensive control stance. But we will see if Zyrios can change that with a little bit more proactivity. It's going to game number 2, where FiveKSBoat, his game plan is pretty straightforward. He wants to just get those weapons online and hit Priest every single turn. There is no acidic swamp ooze. There is no way to interact with those weapons. And so from Zero's perspective, the burden's on him to show that he can deal with the aggression, because once it starts ramping up, there's no turning back.
And there's already the first checkpoint met for Boat. He has the weapon in hand with the Silver Leaf, which I would argue is the most important of the poisons in order to just get the card draw rolling. Even top decks prep for the perfect immediate turn that he can start the card draw rolling. He gets the buff on his weapon, and Zyrios is in trouble as early as now. We actually saw this matchup at the beginning of Kalos Luna versus Race a while ago, and I believe Kalos did end up taking the win there, but that was a very different version of Priest that he was facing, to be fair, which did not have this top end that contains this key card here, Light Shower Elemental from Zyrios, that has Taunt and Death Rattle, heal 8 to all friendly characters. So that is kind of a nightmare for Weapon Rogue to deal with. I'm not necessarily sure if it'll be enough against this early of a start, but compared to regular Control Priest, I kind of like Zyrios' chances.
Yeah, it's a 14-point health swing if your opponent has to kill off the 6/6 and then your opponent heals for 8. So you're effectively being able to gain 14 life from that. And sometimes you get extra if your opponent's weapons are inefficient in terms of crashing into it. And we shall see if Zyrios can hold off against the pressure. Second Wand Maker on the board. Zyrios just going to stack up his removal. Ooh. Okay, so picks up the Powered Feast. I wasn't sure if there was any merit to Idol of Yasharaj given some of the cards that are in his deck, like Talon Forwarding, like the Light Shower Elemental. Does have one of them, and there's also a lot of Battle Cry heavy minions, so this makes a lot more sense to just pick something more consistent.
That is very true that he could have a win condition from something like Idol of Yasharaj, but I do think that if Zyrios makes it to a point where he can play that card safely and it's not guaranteed to give him a ton by any means, that kind of means he's already winning. So I do like the Power Word Feast inclusion, even if it's just going to do something like buff his Wand Maker and have it stick as an annoying minion. However, Boat has hit, I don't know, like the best possible Weapon Rogue start in that he has nicely buffed Shank, not that much damage on it, but the card draw is rolling, and he has a solid grip on the board presence, even picking up the Shaman hero power into a totem that actually deals damage.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, he doesn't really necessarily need as much card draw with Life Tap. I think people will be like, why aren't you just drawing cards? Priest gives you time. You know, I think in FiveKSBoat's mind, you really have to ensure that you have something to deal with these inevitable threats on the board from Zyrios outside of just using your face repeatedly. So I like that. He has his Silver Leaf Poison. He's going to be drawing cards anyways. And so he's just going to shore up some of the other parts of the game plan that might be a little weaker. And Zyrios, on the other hand, is going to discover some more tools, some ways to heal. The Flash Heal, something that caught my eye immediately. I'm kind of wondering if we could use Gift of Luminance in any cheeky way, but it does feel a little bit hard, similar to the Idol of Yasharaj situation we described.
Right. I'm actually looking at the Auspicious Spirits, to be honest. Perhaps not this turn, because this looks like a Condemn and Hero Power face turn to me, which is why he started with Renew. But because he already has another Renew and the Devouring Plague, and as of right now, the weapon is not that big from FiveKSBoat, I was interested in Zyrios maybe trying to set up a more proactive game plan. The problem with that is he would have to still corrupt the Auspicious Spirits, and I don't necessarily think he's going to lead off with Light Shower next turn, given that he's still at full health.
Yeah, the only thing I have a problem with the Auspicious Spirits is while it can be really powerful as a tempo option, FiveKSBoat's going to push in some damage here and draw a card. You know, the fact that Zyrios' deck also synergizes with itself the longer the game goes with cards like Raise Dead is kind of important. I've seen a lot of priests accidentally mess up their pool because of stuff like that.
That is very true. The deck from Zyrios is functioning on being able to pump out multiple Light Shower Elementals and multiple Flesh Giants, both of which are in hand right now. And this could be a Light Shower turn because he has taken quite some damage now. But I think with the pick of Gift of Luminance, Zyrios was definitely hoping to somehow stick that Light Shower and then be able to stick the Luminance on it. It is almost certainly dying if it gets played this turn, but the alternative options are just too slow from Zyrios. The additional health from the Shaman Totem is actually really annoying because he couldn't just Devouring Plague onto the Mankrik.
You don't pick the ones.
Yeah, well, FiveKSBoat, while has to deal with this Light Shower Elemental, has a ton of tools to do so. The Penflinger looks very nice to help make things look very clean.
I'm wondering if there's a way that he can just use the Prize Plunderer instead, but I don't think the number of cards is quite there. The alternate, I think he could push the weapon damage phase, but it would come at the cost of sacrificing his Mankrik, whereas I actually think the board presence is pretty relevant.
Yeah, I can agree with that as well. It looks like Boat is going to do the same thing. Oh, I like that hero power, actually. It makes sense.
With the pickup of this exact hero power, he's actually able to get through without using the weapon. That was very, very clutch there. If it wasn't the mage hero power, he would still have to either send in the Mankrik or the weapon, I believe.
Yes, very clean by FiveKSBoat. Love to see it. Chinese players have been doing well all throughout day one, and many of them are topping the standings. You can see why. Yet another opportunity to yoink a hero power. This is going to be very interesting to see how it continues to squeeze out value up against Zyrios, who now has to respond to a threatening board state. There's 8 represented damage from minions. That weapon is getting a little bit out of control. How does Zyrios deal with this?
Not with those. He picked up Powered Feast and Gift of Luminance, all based on the assumption that at some point he would be able to stick a minion, which, you know, against Weapon Rogue, sometimes a reasonable assumption, because a lot of the time they are just going to ignore your board and ship everything to the face. But KSBoat has had the perfect storm of both board-based threats and removal that doesn't even need him to sink his weapon onto the other side. Zyrios now can get the Flesh Giant down, though, but there's so much minion pressure left on the other side of the board that it does not feel great.
It's true. There is that nice little interaction that Zyrios was showcasing with Devouring Plague. Each individual hit is an instance of lifesteal, discounting Flesh Giant to 0. Is it the time to be able to try and go for this tempo swing by playing the Flesh Giant? I think it's his best shot to fight back onto the board. Plus, KSBoat has to acknowledge this. And he will.
Agree. Yeah, he has the Penflinger to go about it. And yet another yoink. I don't know when they changed the text on OneMaker to say it, give yourself a yoink. But FiveKSBoat, that's actually probably one of the best outcomes for a situation because it's still too early for Sinister Strikes to really get a lot done. And of course, the regular Rogue hero power is useless once you equip a weapon already. Granted, Wandmaker is in the deck because if it's not giving you that stuff, it is giving you poisons, which you really want with your Swine Tusk Shank.
Yeah, and I like the Penfinger inclusion now that I've seen it in action. It does feel like it gives a lot of extra punch to deal with the board. Normally, a board state that the Rogue struggles with is that there's minions that it needs to clear off, but it also really wants to push that damage. And it feels like FiveKSBoat has never had to choose because of that Penflinger, getting access to so many different ways to pick apart whatever Zyrios plays. This is comically one-sided. I was expecting a little bit better action from Zyrios. He's going to go for a desperate Mindrender Lucia here.
Yeah, it's his only play. The good thing for Zyrios in that situation was his hand was completely useless, so he's fine to give it to KSBoat, and he knew about the Penflinger, so he can absolutely dump it here. I'd imagine he also wants to dump the Sinister Strikes. Everything else... Cloak of Shadows also looking pretty tempting for just right now. But the thing is, it's not really that useful in FiveKSBoat's hand. So it's not really a card that you want to play just to get it out of his hand. It's a play to survive for this turn. But survival, I'm not sure is as important as getting rid of all of the minions.
Zyrios swindling for the secret passage. No other minion even draw from the deck.
So I think this is just going to be 2 Sinister Strikes and then the Penflinger on a minion. Then he'll know he's not dead from his own hand. But it's scary because he's not actually able to clear all of these, which means that FiveKSBoat can use the Power Word Feast and Gift of Luminance that were useless in Zyrios' hand.
Yeah, very much so. And it's actually quite great for him to be able to set up this secure board.
If he's not just dead off of Scorpid Discovers, Power Word Feast adds another 2 damage. Is the poison lethal?
Wait. 8.
11, 12, 13. With the hero power, I think that's it.
Oh, that's right. The Demon Hunter hero power coming into play as well. What an unusual sequence of events for FiveKSBoat to rack up that damage. But yeah, should be able to push that 16, 7 on board, 9 with that extra hero power and the swing of the weapon. And Priest is crushed. We talked about how FiveKSBoat might be a lineup that'd be targeting slower decks like the Priest. And it is going to capitalize on that 2-0 lead from our Chinese player. And Zyrios, the unusual deck looks very cool. There's some clear potential in some of the build that he's trying to accomplish. But against such a polarizing deck like the modern form version of Kingsbane Rogue in the form of the Swine Test Shank, it is very difficult to stop this kind of aggression coming out from Rogue once it starts ramping up, especially if you don't have any weapon destruction.
Absolutely. It was the perfect opener from FiveKSBoat, and I think he did make the absolute best of it. The use of Penflinger in that one turn where he hit the Mage Hero power off the second yoink was especially good. And for Zyrios, I liked his Elucia timing a lot. He also set it up in such a way that if he had not been immediately dead that turn, which is, you know, very likely because he knew what he was giving to KSBoat, if KSBoat had swung with the weapon, it would draw more cards into Zyrios' hand, and upon return, maybe Zyrios would be able to heal back up to a healthy enough range or just find another Light Shower Elemental, something like that. But the only question I have is maybe on the Discover picks for Zyrios in the early game, because he did take 2 buff spells that were both predicated on him sticking a minion in the first place, which just kind of never happened.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The fact that Zyrios perhaps misread the situation just a little bit, or rather felt like he had to take a very optimistic line in order to win because it might be that bad of a matchup. I'm sure there's several different possibilities, but those are just a couple that might jump to mind when we analyze that situation. Either way, it's in the past, and we're going to move on to game number 3. The last remaining deck is the scariest here because it is the specialty of FiveKSBoat. Ranked #1 legend with this OTK Demon Hunter. It's extremely powerful in the right hands, and as we've seen from many players in even the Grandmasters program, even unfavored matchups, the best players of this deck list will find a way to win.
Yes, I would say that can definitely happen in most of the unfavored matchups, but against Priest in particular, this is not unfavorable for Demon Hunter because they, for example, get overrun on the board. It is unfavorable for DH simply because of the single copy of Mindrender Elucia, which Zyrios, no matter what type of Priest he's running, even if it has that double flesh giant top end, still has the Elucia in it, and that single card turns the matchup on its head. So I do think that FiveKSBoat's lineup is not a hard target on Priest. It looks like the other 2 decks are quite good against it, excluding the Mirror, but maybe he just kind of had a good deck's lineup because I would say Mage, Priest, Rogue are just the most popular archetypes, and then he has the specialty deck. So depending on what he kind of read for the field, maybe he just said, I want to bring the decks that I feel I have the highest win rate with.
Well, that's certainly curious, and I don't disagree with anything you said. It's just that Zyrios isn't playing Priest. He's not queuing up a deck that has that I win card against that OTK Demon Hunter. Going to start with Rush Warrior instead to try and do exactly what we described, which is to try and overwhelm through minion pressure. I do feel like OTK Demon Hunter does have a better time versus this kind of deck style. Although, again, you know, I haven't really been able to play against many OTK Lifesteal Demon Hunters on ladder. They're kind of a rare breed right now. And not only that, it feels like when we do play against them, a lot of people are messing up with the deck because it feels like they just want to try it out and see what they can do. So I actually haven't gotten many reps of this matchup in particular. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because actually for Specialist Week last week, we did do a lot of testing. I think it was me versus Sottle and Derek over the matchup, and I was playing the Demon Hunter side of it, and it felt not impossible for Demon Hunter, but I did feel a little bit unfavored, and I felt that whenever I did get the wins, I had to get very lucky with discounts on Il'gynoth, on key combo pieces, because I would say that the removal from Demon Hunter is just not enough to completely run the warrior out of threats. Conditioning, even for the first rank, just to get everything above that crucial 3 health breakpoint, makes it very awkward for Demon Hunter to actually remove with things like Chaos Strike Hero Power, or Eldrazi Warblade's Hero Power, or even I-Beam.
All right, well, let's see if that ends up coming into play. FiveKSBoat holding on to Double Jump and the Eldrazi Warblades to start. And you heard how that might be crucial cards in Gia and Sottle's play testing. But, the data does not really make it look very good. Rush Warrior is an overwhelming favorite, around 65-35. Just if you look at the overarching big picture, and we'll see if Zyrios can get off on the right foot. He's got the Imprisoned Gnark, so the Fiery Warx is coming in just a couple of short turns, and that's going to be some nice damage to rack things up. But look at FiveKSBoat having a lot of card draw to start things off.
Yeah, the Spectral side already in outcast position. You love to see that. In the early game, I would say there's 2 different ways the warrior can approach the matchup, which is just curving out. A lot of the time, Demon Hunter can struggle with that if they haven't hit the removal, the I-Beam, for example. And if the warrior hasn't hit that, then they can go for those type of hands where they're drawing, they are building up more value with conditioning, and then they explode onto a board with health breakpoints on minions that don't just get swept up by Immolation Aura. It does look like Zyrios' hand is more on the curve game plan. And it so happens that FiveKSBoat is running these double Sigil of Flames, which is really good against that because the Rakara, even if she comes down this turn, she can buff the bumper car out of range of dying to the Sigil of Flames, but it's not worth it because Rakara herself will die.
That is true. And Rakara must be protected at all costs. Just because I like that card a lot. It's super fun to play and stack your advantage as long as your minions survive. Rakara is bae, but not into a Sigil of Flame. That you let the bumper card take the hit on that one.
She is definitely bae, but she's old enough to fight for herself. Isn't that what her voice text says? So no need for protection there. On KSBoat's side, though, I want to say beyond just the excess of card draw he has a very doable position to get Skull all the way to the left, which is the kicker here. I mean, as soon as he gets the big discounts and he'll have enough healing from the Eldrazi Warblades, Zyrios will be on a clock.
It is true, and without a ton of direct damage, something that we talked a little bit about with TJ yesterday when we saw Rush Warrior struggle in a position where it needs to deal direct damage from hand, it just doesn't have nearly as much pressure tools as you would like to close out the game. There's no Grommash Hellscream to use a charge from the hand. You have Alex Straza as 8 damage, and that's just about it. I am curious about the Shadow Hunter Vol'jin. That is one of the more Zyrios unique tech cards. What do you think is the purpose of that card here, as FiveKSBoat's just going to draw a bunch of cards here, prepare for his next few turns?
I'd imagine that's more of a tech for Paladin, maybe. That Vol'jin is very, very powerful against any deck that invests buffs, and then you just put it back in their hand and then take out a tiny minion in exchange. I don't think it's going to do very much against Demon Hunter, because as soon as KSBoat plays a minion, it's either immediately going to blow up along with the rest of Zyrios' board, or Zyrios' face will blow up as well. The Stonewall Anchorman, which is also an unusual tech for Zyrios, I feel could get potentially a little bit more work done. Not probably going to draw him a card immediately, but just as a minion to put on board as a threat that has decent health total on it. And you can already see from Zyrios willing to temple out this Blademaster Samuro, just trying desperately to stick any damage because the card draw from KSBoat never stops.
Yeah, and you can see that it's going to continue to go on. As long as Zyrios is not really pressuring, finds a I-Beam that can clean up the Blademaster Samuro with the combination of the attack.
Yeah, I kind of like the look of that. Honestly, for KSBoat, his biggest problem right now is budgeting his hand space, because I think he's in a position where he can't acrobatics and Skull consecutively because he would just have too much in hand. Acrobatics in this deck, I find very rarely that you're able to get off the additional value of it. You kind of just play it as a 3-cost outcast Spectral Sight a lot of the time, and that's good enough. For here, I'm interested in FiveKSBoat coining out the Eldraki, as he is just going to do, because the priority is just to get the Skull onto the left as soon as possible and get the most cards out of your hand while doing that. He has held on pretty diligently to the Talented Arcanist, though, because that's a very key card to pair with Immolation Aura to really get to the high health breakpoints on the next board. He doesn't have the Immolation, though.
It's true. You know, you want to capitalize off that +2 spell damage when you can. Immolation Aura is one of the best to do so. Speaking of capitalizing on an established board, Rakara hits the board, and now the pressure really starting to ramp up here. And Zyrios is on the offensive. FiveKSBoat also just used a little bit of removal, right? The weapon swing plus a lifesteal.
Right.
The I-Beam finds a Skull of Gul'dan off the top, and then it's going to be 3 discounts.
That's so huge.
Cheap cards.
I was going to say for Zyrios, his timing to build a board like this was perfect because it's the first turn where FiveKSBoat could reasonably play Skull from a potential left-hand position. It so happened that the Skull came off the top and happened that way. And if FiveKSBoat didn't find that, it was looking scary because he didn't have Immolation Aura and he still had to take one more turn to put the Skull in the left. It's going to be painful this turn, but he has plenty of draws that can heal him all the way back up because he is not dead this turn, which means that a single Fellscream Blast or second I-Beam could put him all the way back to square one for Zyrios.
Yep, that's right. And with some of the additions throughout the past couple of expansions, there's just a lot of ways that you can part ways with your combo pieces, like in Moarg Artificer or a Talented Arcanist, and still have plenty of damage to overkill. Not to mention, warriors in general, they're not really stacking armor these days whatsoever. So even though they can go past that 30-point limit, you can easily combo warrior or any other defensive class like that just by having a few cards in your hand as opposed to having like an 8-piece combo. So FiveKSBoat is going to need to stabilize this turn and probably part ways with a good portion of his hand.
Very true. He did pick up I-Beam, which is pretty good here, but he is going to put it in the middle. I was interested on maybe starting off with a Moarg and Arcanist turn, because if he didn't discover another I-Beam, that means the one that I think he is necessarily going to use this turn was going to cost 3. That didn't feel optimal to me, but he picked up a second I-Beam, so I guess it's all good.
Yeah, it works out okay, but yeah, I totally have made that mistake before when playing this deck where I was like, okay, well, draw first, right? Or like look at what card resource generation you're going to have before you make your decision. You want to have all the facts in front of you before you come to your decision. And FiveKSBoat could have incidentally put himself in a very awkward spot, but ends up being okay. And now this board state has completely been neutralized. Zyrios has to restart from the ground up, only having a Warmaw Challenger that really doesn't do much on this board. Not to mention, you still kind of have to deal with this Moarg Artificer, so he's going to prioritize playing a Rusher here, but does have a couple of choices on how he wants to go about that.
Yeah, it's really close, right? Because I think ideally he'd love to have a conditioning here to just build the next board and say, you've already used an Arcanist, you probably don't have second Arcanist plus Immolation Aura to get over the top of this. And if he is looking for conditioning, then he could go for the Stonemaul Anchorman to take the draw here. However, if he doesn't hit exactly that, it could be too slow. So I think perhaps the Runthak could be better here. He can still take out the Moarg, including the trade from the Warmaw Challenger, and that does buff, you know, most of his minions to a decent range. Oh,
quite awkward. Quite awkward that Zyrios seems to have drawn a big portion of the 5-cost cards in this deck when, you know, most of the deck wants to be lean and quite quick on the startup for turns. FiveKSBoat with the second Skull of Gul'dan, drawing that Immolation Aura, 2 of them in fact.
Yeah, very strong.
For free. So Philosophy can now copy that Moarg to get another one that's 0 mana. This is starting to look very hard for Zyrios to be able to win from this position, especially if that 10th Thrasher just goes down.
Yeah, and it absolutely can. FiveKSBoat can play the expensive Moarg even, and then Immolation Aura to clear everything but the Warmaul Challenger. And he doesn't even need his Raging Fell Screamer from this point because, like you said, the Moarg from the Skull is already at 0. He'll have 2 of those in his back pocket, and then the next turn he can continue drawing with the Spectral Sight. If he goes for Spectral Sight now, though, we could potentially just see double Immolation Aura and then hold the other Moarg in hand, which is also very reasonable because if he just hits Il'gynoth soon, then he can just play one expensive Moarg, one cheap Moarg, and with a Fell Scream Blast end the game.
Yeah, I realized that both of the Fell Scream Blasts seem to be in the bottom 5 cards of the deck. That's not really that big of an issue here because FiveKSBoat still has Acrobatics Tech tucked in on the far left. And as we have mentioned before, still is not under any real threat. Zyrios would have to set up a 2-turn lethal in order for FiveKSBoat to feel desperate enough to have to play for stabilization. But FiveKSBoat is in a position to win as soon as next turn if Zyrios can't do anything here.
It is true. And last turn from Zyrios, although I did say I expected something like Renthak, Zyrios found the play that gave him the most immediate damage and said, if you don't have the Immolation, I can set up a 2-turn lethal probably. It just so happened that the clear was there, and now Zyrios has to start from scratch, and it looks far less powerful. There's just not much he can do, and he knows it. Like, FiveKSBoat copied a Moarg in hand, and if Zyrios was paying attention, he will know that the Moarg was the 3rd card discounted to Skull by 0, in all likelihood, because there are 2 cards that cost 0 in the Immolation Auras, and then a 3rd one got copied, and you kind of know by then.
Yeah, this is looking pretty bad here. The more I analyze the situation here, the less I like it from Zyrios' perspective. It's starting to really appear as if Zyrios has no ability to pressure the Demon Hunter, and FiveKSBoat in just 2 turns will have drawn the remaining 5 cards of his deck, guaranteed. So now it comes down to whether or not FiveKSBoat wins this turn. Is that a Fell Scream Blast? I think it is. I just have to count here.
I think it's 24. Oh, sorry, you can play 3 Moargs. Yeah, that's 48. Moargs. I'm pretty sure.
Because
yeah, with the philosophy.
Doubles 3 times to the power of 3 with an extra spell damage. It's just way overkill. And that's going to be the end of this game, the end of this series. FiveKSBoat 3-0, improving to a 6-0 score over Zyrios, and showing you how one of the more unconventional lineups with OTK Demon Hunter also has a lot of game, which you want to see, right? Like, as much as people are talking about what are the best classes currently in the meta game, you also want to see if anybody can punish that. And I think that Lifesteal Demon Hunter, especially when it's played very well technically, is one of the more beautiful things to watch in the game if you're a fan of high-level competitive Hearthstone.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you set up the context of FiveKSBoat being a top-level OTK Demon Hunter player. I assume you meant rank 1 legend on the Chinese server, which has over 100,000 legends, if I'm not mistaken, which means it's just the toughest one to reach rank 1 legend on. That's incredible. And even though I did have a couple questions on that one turn where he started with Illidari Studies on what looked like a start with I-Beam turn, in retrospect, what I suggested of using 1 Moarg, 1 Immolation would have not given him this cutoff of 48, in which you keep all 3 Moargs, and that was great foresight from FiveKSBoat to say, I don't even need the second Immolation Aura if I can just